The lunch inside Marcus's box was not just food. It was a story. It was love packed carefully before sunrise. That morning, while the sky was still dark and quiet, his grandmother had stood in their small kitchen with soft music playing from an old radio. The kitchen light was warm and yellow, and the smell of spices filled the air. She moved slowly because her knees hurt, but she never complained. She washed the rice, stirred the beans, and fried the plantains until they turned golden and sweet. Every movement was gentle and careful. Before closing the lunchbox, she touched Marcus's cheek and smiled. "This is from home," she said softly. Marcus had nodded, but he knew something his grandmother did not know. At school, home did not always feel welcome. Now, sitting in the noisy cafeteria, Marcus looked at the food again. The rice was white and soft, the beans were dark and shiny, and the plantains smelled sweet and warm. It reminded him of Sundays, when music played loudly in their apartment and his grandmother told stories about her childhood. Those stories were full of laughter, strong people, and proud history. But here, in this loud cafeteria, the food felt different, felt exposed. Marcus tried to eat quickly, hoping no one would notice. He took one small bite and kept his eyes down. For a few seconds, everything was quiet around him. Then he heard it, a soft voice from the table behind him. "What is that smell?" Another voice answered, "It smells weird." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He kept chewing slowly, pretending he did not hear anything. But the voices became louder. One of the boys stood up and walked closer. He looked down at Marcus's lunchbox with a confused face. "Bro, what even is that?" he asked. Some kids at the nearby table started laughing. Marcus felt heat rise to his face. His ears felt hot, and his hands started shaking. "It's just food," Marcus said quietly, almost like a whisper. The boy laughed. "That doesn't look like food," he said. "It looks strange." Another boy leaned forward and made a dramatic face like he smelled something bad. More laughter. The sound of laughter can be small, but it can feel very big. For Marcus, it felt like the whole room was laughing, even if only a few kids were. He wished the floor would open and hide him. He wished he had brought pizza instead. He wished he had asked his grandmother to pack something different. But then he remembered her smile that morning. He remembered how proud she looked when she closed the lunchbox. Suddenly, the laughter did not just hurt his feelings. It hurt something deeper. Felt like they were laughing at her too. Marcus slowly closed the lid of his lunchbox. He was no longer hungry. The food that had smelled warm and sweet now felt heavy and distant. One girl at another table looked uncomfortable, but she did not say anything. Most of the students just watched quietly, unsure what to do. The boy who had started the teasing shook his head and went back to his seat, still smiling. But Marcus could still feel the eyes on him. He kept staring at the table, tracing a small scratch in the wood with his finger. His mind filled with questions. Why was different so funny to them? Why did something normal at home feel wrong at school? He remembered the stories his grandmother told about moving to a new place when she was young. She said people sometimes stared at her clothes, her accent, her hair. She said it hurt, but she stayed strong. Marcus wanted to be strong too, but right now he felt small. He picked up his fork again, then put it down. He thought about throwing the food away. Maybe if he did that, tomorrow would be easier. Maybe if he changed, they would stop laughing. But deep inside, something told him that changing who he was would hurt even more. The cafeteria noise slowly returned to normal. Kids went back to talking about games and homework, but Marcus felt like time had stopped just for him. He stared at his reflection in the shiny metal of his fork. His face looked quiet, but his eyes looked sad. He did not know that someone across the room had seen everything. Someone had heard every laugh. Someone had noticed the way his shoulders dropped when he closed his lunchbox. Marcus did not know that this moment, this small painful moment, was about to become something much bigger. He thought this was just another bad lunch break. He thought it would pass and be forgotten. But sometimes, the smallest moments are the ones that change everything. Across the cafeteria, Mrs. Thompson had been standing near the teacher's table, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. She was not just watching the students, she was listening. After teaching for more than 20 years, she had learned something important. Children do not always show pain loudly. Sometimes pain is quiet. Sometimes it hides behind a lowered head and shaking hands. When she first heard the laughter from Marcus's table, she did not move right away. She turned slowly and looked in that direction. At first, it seemed like normal cafeteria noise, but then she saw Marcus's shoulders. They were tight and slightly curved inward. She saw the way he quickly closed his lunchbox. She saw the boys smiling in a way that was not kind, and she understood everything without hearing every word. Mrs. Thompson had seen this before. Not the same students, not the same food, but the same feeling. A child feeling alone in a crowded room. She remembered being a young teacher many years ago. She had once ignored a small moment like this, thinking it was not serious. Later she found out the student had stopped bringing lunch from home and had begun skipping meals. That memory still stayed with her. She promised herself she would never ignore small moments again. She placed her coffee cup down slowly. Instead of calling out from across the room, she began walking quietly toward Marcus's table. Her shoes made soft sounds on the cafeteria floor. The closer she got, the quieter the nearby students became. Teachers walking toward a table usually meant someone was in trouble. The boys who had been laughing noticed her first. Their smiles faded quickly. Marcus did not look up. He thought maybe she was walking past him. Maybe she had not seen anything. But then he heard her gentle voice right beside him. "Marcus," she said softly. He looked up slowly, surprised. His eyes were still a little red. Mrs. Thompson did not look angry. She did not look disappointed. She looked calm, very calm. She glanced at the boys, but she did not raise her voice. Instead, she pulled out a chair and sat down next to Marcus. The entire cafeteria seemed to freeze for a moment. Students nearby stopped talking, pretending not to listen but listening very closely. Mrs. Thompson looked at the closed lunchbox on the table. "That smells wonderful," she said in a normal, warm voice. Marcus blinked in confusion. No one had said that before. The boys looked at each other, unsure what to say. Mrs. Thompson did not mention teasing. She did not say the word bullying. She did not embarrass anyone. She simply said, "Would you tell me what you have today?" Marcus hesitated for a second, then slowly opened the lid again. The smell of rice and plantains rose softly into the air. "My grandmother made it," he said quietly. Mrs. Thompson smiled gently. "She must love you very much," she replied. Marcus nodded. The boys at the table shifted in their seats. They were expecting a lecture. They were expecting to be called out loudly in front of everyone. But instead, Mrs. Thompson did something different. She asked Marcus questions about the food, what country it came from, when his grandmother learned to cook it, what it tasted like. As Marcus answered, his voice slowly became stronger. He explained how his grandmother said plantains were sweet like sunshine. He shared how they ate this meal during special family days. Without even realizing it, Marcus began smiling a little. The boys listened quietly. Something had changed. The laughter from before now felt out of place. Mrs. Thompson finally looked at the boys, not with anger, but with steady eyes. "Have any of you ever tried something new before?" she asked. They shrugged. One of them nodded slowly. "It can feel strange at first," she continued, "but sometimes the things that seem different are actually amazing." Her voice was calm but strong. It carried more power than shouting ever could. She was not just speaking to the boys. She was speaking to the whole room. Students at nearby tables leaned in quietly. Mrs. Thompson believed something deeply. She believed classrooms were not just for math and reading. They were for learning how to be human. And this was one of those lessons. Marcus watched her carefully. He had never seen someone defend him without making a big scene. She was protecting him without embarrassing him. She was correcting others without shaming them. That kind of strength was new to him. The boys who had teased him now looked uncomfortable, not because they were yelled at, but because they were thinking, and thinking can be more powerful than punishment. Mrs. Thompson then said something that surprised everyone. "Marcus," she asked gently, "would you mind if I tried a small bite?" The table went completely silent. Even the boys looked shocked. Marcus's eyes widened. No teacher had ever asked Teach. It was just another Monday morning at Jefferson Middle School, and everything looked normal from the outside. The yellow school buses lined up near the sidewalk, and students walked through the front doors with sleepy faces and heavy backpacks. Some kids were laughing loudly, some were running to meet their friends, and some were already worried about homework they forgot to finish. Teachers stood near the entrance, greeting students and reminding them not to run in the halls. It was the kind of morning that felt the same as every other morning, calm but noisy at the same time. Marcus walked slowly behind a group of louder boys, holding the straps of his old backpack tightly. He was 11 years old, thin, quiet, and careful with everything he did. He did not like to be noticed too much. He liked to stay in the background where things felt safe. Marcus was a good student. He listened in class, finished his work on time, and never caused trouble. But even though he tried to stay invisible, sometimes the world did not let him. That morning, something felt different inside his chest. It was a small, heavy feeling that he could not explain. He tried to ignore it as he walked down the hallway toward his classroom. Lockers slammed shut around him. Voices echoed off the walls, and sneakers squeaked on the shiny floor. He finally reached his classroom and quietly took his seat near the window. The window was his favorite place. From there, he could see the trees outside moving in the wind. Looking outside made him feel calm, like the world was bigger than just one classroom. Mrs. Thompson was already writing the day's lesson on the board. She smiled at the class and said good morning in her warm, steady voice. Marcus liked her voice. It made him feel safe. The morning classes passed slowly, math first, then reading, then science. Marcus answered 2 questions correctly in math, but he kept his voice low so no one would look at him too much. When reading time came, he followed each word carefully with his finger. He liked stories. Stories felt easier than real life. In stories, problems always had answers. In real life, he was not so sure. As the clock moved closer to lunchtime, the heavy feeling in his chest grew a little stronger. He looked at the small lunchbox inside his backpack. It was blue and a little faded at the corners. His grandmother had packed it early that morning. She always woke up before the sun. Even when she was tired, Marcus remembered seeing her in the kitchen, moving slowly but with love. The smell of warm rice and fried plantains had filled their small apartment. She had smiled at him and said, "Eat well today, baby." He had smiled back, but he also knew something else. He knew that not everyone at school understood food like that. Last week, a boy had laughed at another student for bringing soup in a container. The week before that, someone had said a girl's homemade bread smelled strange. Marcus had stayed quiet both times. But today the lunch was his. The bell finally rang loud and sharp, and students jumped out of their seats like birds flying from a tree. Chairs scraped the floor, books closed quickly, and everyone rushed toward the cafeteria. Marcus waited a few seconds before standing up. He always waited. He did not like crowds. As he walked toward the cafeteria, he could hear loud voices and laughter coming from inside. The cafeteria was bright and full of noise. Trays clattered, kids shouted across tables, and the smell of pizza filled the air. Marcus looked around and chose a table near the corner. He sat down slowly and placed his lunchbox in front of him. His hands rested on top of it for a moment. He took a deep breath. He told himself it would be fine. Maybe today no one would notice. Maybe today would stay normal. Around him, other students were already opening bags of chips and trading cookies. A group of boys sat at the table next to him, laughing loudly at something on one of their phones. Marcus tried not to look at them. He focused on the sound of his own breathing. His fingers slowly unzipped the lunchbox. The zipper sound felt louder than it really was. He opened the lid just a little, and the warm smell of home rose into the air. For a second, everything felt still. One of the boys at the next table turned his head slightly. Then another. Marcus felt their eyes before he even looked up. His heart began to beat faster. The heavy feeling in his chest was no longer small. It was strong now. He lifted the lid completely. The rice, beans, and golden plantains were right there, simple and made with care. He picked up his fork, but before he could take the first bite, he heard a whisper from behind him, and then a small laugh. Marcus froze. He did not know what would happen next, but deep inside, he felt that this ordinary day was about to become something very different. The cafeteria felt different now. The air was quiet but heavy. Every student near Marcus's table was watching closely. Some pretended to eat, some pretended to talk, but their eyes kept moving back to the same place. Mrs. Thompson was still sitting beside Marcus, calm and steady. Marcus looked at his lunch, then at her face, trying to understand if she was serious. "May I?" she asked again gently, holding out her fork. Marcus swallowed nervously and nodded. He carefully scooped a small piece of plantain and some rice onto her fork. His hand was still shaking a little. The boys who had teased him leaned forward slightly. They expected something funny to happen. Maybe she would taste it and make a face. Maybe she would say it was too strange. Maybe the laughter would return. But that is not what happened. Mrs. Thompson placed the fork in her mouth slowly. She closed her eyes for a moment as she tasted it. The room was so quiet that even the sound of trays moving in the distance felt loud. Marcus held his breath without realizing it. After a few seconds, Mrs. Thompson opened her eyes and smiled warmly. "This is delicious," she said clearly, not softly, not shyly, but clearly enough for nearby tables to hear. Marcus blinked in surprise. The boys looked confused. She took another small bite, nodding her head. "The plantains are sweet and warm," she continued, "and the rice is perfectly cooked." There was no joke in her voice, no pretending. She meant it. Then she stood up slowly, holding the fork in her hand. She looked around at the students near them. "Food," she said calmly, "is one of the most beautiful parts of who we are." Some students shifted in their seats. She continued, "Every family has something special, something that tells a story." Marcus looked up at her. He had never heard someone speak about his food like that before. She walked a few steps away from the table but stayed close enough for Marcus to feel supported. "When we laugh at someone's food," she said, "we are not just laughing at a meal. We are laughing at their home, their family, and their history." The words were simple, but they landed heavily in the room. The boys who had been teasing stared down at their trays. The laughter from earlier now felt small and weak. Mrs. Thompson did not point fingers. She did not call anyone out by name. She simply let the truth sit in the air. She turned back to Marcus and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You should be proud," she said quietly, but everyone heard it. "Your grandmother made this with love." Marcus felt something warm rise in his chest. It was not fear this time. It was something stronger, felt like pride. The same food that had made him feel embarrassed minutes ago now felt important. Important enough for a teacher to stand up for it. Important enough to be respected. Mrs. Thompson then looked at the class and said, "Tomorrow, I have an idea." Curiosity spread across the room. "Everyone will bring a lunch that represents their family," she explained. "You can share where it comes from and why it matters to you." Some students looked excited. Some looked nervous. The boys who had teased Marcus looked unsure. They were not expecting this to turn into something for everyone. "But remember," Mrs. Thompson added gently, "we listen with respect." She did not need to raise her voice. Her calm strength filled the space. Marcus looked down at his lunchbox again, but this time he did not close it. He took another bite slowly, and for the first time since the laughter started, he tasted the sweetness again. It no longer felt heavy, felt like home. One of the boys who had laughed earlier glanced at Marcus, then at the food. His expression was different now. Not mocking, not amused, just thinking. That small change was the beginning of something bigger. Around the cafeteria, the normal noise slowly returned, but something had shifted. It was quiet and invisible, yet powerful. Marcus felt taller in his chair, not because anything about him had changed, but because someone had chosen to stand beside him instead of watching from far away. Sometimes change does not come with shouting or punishment. Sometimes it comes with one calm action, one bite of food, one sentence spoken with respect. Marcus did not know it yet, but this moment would not only change how others saw him, it would change how he saw himself. The next morning felt different the moment Marcus stepped into the classroom. There was a quiet energy in the air, like something important was about to happen. Students were not talking about math homework or video games. They were talking about lunch. "What are you bringing?" One girl asked her friend. "My mom is making dumplings." Another boy said proudly, "I'm bringing my dad's spicy chicken." Someone else added. Marcus sat at his desk, listening carefully. For the first time, he was not afraid of the word lunch. But he was still unsure. Would the teasing come back? Would yesterday be forgotten? His grandmother had packed his lunch again that morning. When he told her about what happened, she listened quietly. She did not get angry. She simply smiled softly and said, "Sometimes people laugh at what they do not understand." Then she added extra plantains to his lunchbox. "Let them taste sunshine," she said with a wink. Marcus remembered those words as he waited for lunchtime. Mrs. Thompson had not forgotten her promise. Before the lunch bell rang, she stood at the front of the class. "Today," she said, "we will learn something more important than any test." The students looked curious. "We will learn about each other," she continued. When the bell rang, no one rushed out as fast as usual. There was excitement instead of chaos. In the cafeteria, the tables looked colorful and different. Containers of all shapes and sizes covered the surfaces. Some had rice, some had noodles, some had sandwiches with special sauces. The air smelled like many homes mixed together. Marcus sat down and opened his lunchbox slowly. This time, he did not hide it. He placed it clearly on the table. A few students glanced over, but there was no whispering, no laughter. Mrs. Thompson stood near the center of the room, smiling as she watched the students. "Who would like to share first?" she asked. A girl raised her hand nervously. She stood up and explained how her grandmother taught her mother to bake sweetbread every Sunday. As she spoke, her voice grew stronger. The class listened quietly. Then a boy shared about the spicy soup his family made during winter. He even described how his father stirred the pot while telling jokes. The room began to feel warmer with every story. When it was Marcus's turn, his heart beat fast again. But it was not fear this time. It was courage trying to grow. He stood up slowly, holding his lunchbox carefully. "My grandmother makes this for me," he began. His voice was soft but steady. "She says plantains are sweet like sunshine," he added. A few students smiled. He explained how they ate this meal on special days, how music played in the kitchen while she cooked, how the smell filled their apartment. As he spoke, he noticed something surprising. The boys who had teased him were not laughing. They were listening, really listening. One of them even raised his hand. "Can I try some?" he asked quietly. Marcus paused for a second. Yesterday, that question would have scared him, but today felt different. He nodded. The boy took a small bite, chewing slowly. "It's actually good," he admitted, looking a little embarrassed. Some students laughed gently, but not in a mean way. It was the kind of laugh that breaks tension. Soon, other students began trading small bites of food, carefully, respectfully. The cafeteria became a place of sharing instead of judging. Mrs. Thompson watched with proud eyes. She did not interrupt. She did not need to. The lesson was happening on its own. Marcus felt something new inside him. It was not just pride. It was belonging. For the first time, he did not feel like the different one. He felt like part of the group. The boy who had laughed the loudest yesterday looked at Marcus again. "I didn't know," he said honestly. Marcus nodded. "That's okay," he replied softly. "Sometimes people change when they are given a chance to learn." And today everyone was learning. The food on the tables was more than just meals. It was stories. It was memories. It was family. By the end of lunch, the room felt lighter than it had in weeks. Students were smiling at each other in new ways, not because they were the same, but because they understood their differences better. As Marcus closed his lunchbox, he realized something important. Yesterday, he had almost wished to hide who he was. Today, he was glad he did not, because sometimes, one moment of courage can open the door for everyone else. The change did not happen all at once. It was not loud. It did not come with applause or a big speech. It came quietly, like sunlight slowly filling a dark room. The day after the food sharing, the classroom felt softer somehow. Students still laughed and talked, but the laughter sounded different. It was lighter, kinder. Marcus noticed it first during morning math class. Usually, he kept his eyes down and answered questions only when called. But when Mrs. Thompson asked a difficult question about fractions, Marcus slowly raised his hand. For a second, he almost lowered it again. Old habits are hard to break. But something inside him whispered, "You belong here." Mrs. Thompson smiled when she saw his hand. "Yes, Marcus," she said warmly. He stood up and explained the answer step by step. His voice shook at first, but no one laughed. No one whispered. In fact, a few students nodded as he spoke. When he finished, the room was quiet for half a second. Then Mrs. Thompson said, "Excellent explanation." And something surprising happened. A few students lightly tapped their desks in approval. It was not loud clapping, but it was enough. Marcus felt warmth rise in his chest again. Later that day, during group work, something even more unexpected happened. Mrs. Thompson divided the class into small teams for a science project. Marcus found himself in a group with the same boys who had teased him earlier in the week. For a moment, the old nervous feeling returned. He wondered if the kindness at lunch had been temporary. He wondered if they would laugh again when the teacher was not watching. The boys looked at him, unsure how to start. Then one of them cleared his throat. "Hey, you're good at explaining stuff," he said awkwardly. "Do you want to help us figure this out?" Marcus blinked in surprise. He had expected distance, not invitation. He nodded slowly and leaned closer to the project sheet. As they worked together, something simple but powerful began to grow. Conversation. Real conversation. They talked about the science experiment, then about video games, then about favorite movies. It was not perfect. There were still small pauses, still moments of awkward silence. But there was no teasing, no cruel laughter. During recess, Marcus usually stayed near the edge of the playground, drawing quietly or watching others play basketball. But that afternoon, one of the boys tossed a ball toward him gently. "You coming?" he asked casually. The question was simple, but it felt big. Marcus hesitated only for a second before walking toward the court. He was not the best player. He missed one easy shot and felt his face grow warm again. But instead of mocking him, one boy said, "It's cool, try again." And he did. That small encouragement meant more than they realized. Across the playground, Mrs. Thompson watched carefully, not with worry, but with quiet hope. She understood something important about children. When given a safe space to learn kindness, many of them will choose it. The boys who once laughed were not bad children. They had simply followed the crowd without thinking. Now they were thinking, and thinking leads to change. Back in the classroom later that week, something else shifted. Students began asking each other questions about their families, about traditions, about favorite meals at home. The room felt fuller somehow, not louder, just richer. Marcus noticed that he was no longer shrinking into his seat. He sat straighter. He spoke more clearly. He even laughed out loud during a joke, something he had rarely done before. The biggest change, however, was not outside. It was inside him. The heavy feeling that once sat in his chest was gone. In its place was something steady, confidence. He realized that the teasing had not been about his food being strange. It had been about others not understanding it. And once they understood, the power of the teasing disappeared. On Friday afternoon, as the week came to an end, Marcus packed his backpack slowly. One of the boys stopped beside his desk. "Hey," he said, "my mom is making dumplings this weekend. You should try them someday." Marcus smiled. "I will," he replied. Walking home that day, the sky looked brighter than usual. Nothing about the school building had changed. The walls were the same, the desks were the same, but the feeling inside those walls was different. Kinder, stronger, more aware. And Marcus understood something important. Sometimes one moment of courage can begin a change. But it is the days after that show whether the change is real. And in this classroom, the change was real.